Hello, good morning. My name is Simon Hill. Thank you for clicking this video. Today I will be reading two articles about black nationalism. The first one comes from Stanford. It's from the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute. The second one that I will be reading comes from North Carolina State University and it's called Black Nationalism in Historical Context. The reason I am reading these articles is to educate people on what black nationalism is and answer the question, finally and definitively, if Simon Hill, I, am a black nationalist. Let's begin. Achieving major national influence through the Nation of Islam (NOI) and the Black Power movement of the 1960s, proponents of black nationalism advocated economic self-sufficiency, race pride for African Americans, and black separatism, reacting against white racial prejudice and critical of the gap between American democratic ideals and the reality of segregation and discrimination in America in the 1960s. Black nationalists criticized the methods of Martin Luther King Jr., the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and other organizations that sought to reform American society through nonviolent interracial activism. In his 1963 letter from Birmingham Jail, King described himself as standing between the forces of complacency and the hatred and despair of the black nationalists. King, 90. The historical roots of black nationalism can be traced back to 19th century African American leaders such as abolitionist Martin Delany, who advocated the emigration of northern free blacks to Africa, where they would settle and assist native Africans in nation building. Delany believed that this development would also uplift the status and condition of African Americans who remained, calling them a nation within a nation, really a broken people. Painter Martin R. Delany. 20th century black nationalism was greatly influenced by Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican immigrant to the United States who founded the United Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, in 1914. In an essay titled The Future as I See It, Garvey insisted that the UNIA was organized for the absolute purpose of bettering our condition industrially, commercially, socially, religiously, and politically. Garvey and the UNIA also promoted black emigration to Africa as a program of national independence, and independence so strong as to enable us to rout others if they attempt to interfere with us. Speech by Marcus Garvey. One of the UNIA's main efforts was to establish black-owned businesses, the best known being the Black Star Line, a firm that planned to transport people and goods to Africa. Although 35,000 investors flocked to buy $5 shares of Black Star Line stock, the shipping firm and the UNIA's other commercial ventures failed. Garvey was convicted of mail fraud in 1923 and eventually deported, but he remained a heroic figure to many future black nationalists. I want to pause and stop briefly about the Back to Africa movement started by Marcus Garvey and Delany. I think that African Americans, if they want to move back to Africa, they can and they should. And Africans who want to move to America or other countries, anywhere in the world, they should. And they should be able to do this freely and easily. I don't think that African Americans moving back to Africa will solve all of the problems because being in America so long, African Americans, I believe, have become a culturally distinct group of people. And we are sort of, as I say, I guess, our own sort of African tribe, right? Also, in a sense, we are Americans as well. We are some of the truest Americans because we have literally been there since the beginning of the colonization process. When the first Europeans came to the New World, as they call it, Africans were right there with them. So abandoning America, while understandable, is not, I believe, the overall solution. As we saw in Liberia, I'm surprised this article has not mentioned Liberia, but yeah. As we saw in Liberia, many African Americans were retransplanted back to Africa in a country called Liberia, started by the United States, and many of them became sort of like colonial overlords of Africans there, and and many of the native Africans faced discriminations from the Americo Liberians, right, the American descendants of slaves who resettled in Liberia, and I think that. That goes to show in a context, even though Liberia was not supported by the U.S. and became sort of a failed state after its many coups and civil wars. I'm surprised that the story of Liberia is not a warning sign, a warning tale of how black nationalism can fail, right? I don't believe in nationalism in the sense that we need a nation for a specific group of people because we are all one human race and all people, regardless of where they were born, what race, race they have, what ethnicity, what their background is, what their religion is. Everybody deserves to be able to travel, move, live, work anywhere in the world freely as they want. And with that, everybody should be treated with respect and dignity. So the fight for racial equality in the US is a fight for all people to be able to live and work in the US peacefully. And the fight for racial equality everywhere in the world is the fight for all people to be able to live, work everywhere in the world peacefully. So, uh, so I'll say, as my opinion about the Back to Africa movement, finally and definitively, this is my opinion as it is right now. Going back to Africa will not solve all of the problems of African Americans, right? Because there will be cultural adjustments that we have to make if we go to any African country as African Americans, and we also have to adjust to the cultures, languages, and many African nations are nations in themselves, right? So nations, of course, have problems such as crime, unemployment, that sort of thing. I'm making this video in Africa right now. I am in a country called Mauritius, and I love Mauritius. It's actually a really nice place, but I'll say that just moving here would not solve all the problems of being black, or dealing with racism, or dealing with white supremacy, and that sort of thing. We're living in a globalized world that's becoming increasingly more and more homogenized. So some of the same problems that you'll find in many of the Western countries related to white supremacy and related to capitalism, you will find, of course, obviously, in other countries, even in African countries. So while moving to Africa might alleviate or ease some of the pain of dealing with being a minority, right? It will not solve all of the problems, right? So I'll continue reading. So during the economic depression of the 1930s, Farad Muhammad, a Detroit peddler, founded another significant organization of black nationalists, the NOI. The NOI sought to develop an intentionally separate and economically self-sufficient black community governed by a revised version of the Muslim faith. Muhammad's claim that whites were blue-eyed devils seeking to oppress blacks made him a controversial figure. When Farad Muhammad disappeared in 1934 after various factions in the NOI battled for dominance, his disciple Elijah Muhammad became the sect's leader. By the late 1950s, NOI minister Malcolm X had emerged as the group's most dynamic and popular spokesperson. Early on, Malcolm X's oratory combined calls for racial independence with criticisms of mainstream civil rights leaders who cooperated with whites. In his November 1963 speech, Message to the Grassroots, Malcolm X defined land as the basis of freedom, justice, and equality, and declared a revolutionary wants land so he can set up his own nation, an independent nation. These Negroes aren't asking for any nation. They're trying to crawl back on the plantation. If you're afraid of black nationalism, you're afraid of revolution. And if you love revolution, you love black nationalism. Malcolm X, Message to the Grassroots, 9 through 10. So I think the NOI has had a tremendous effect on black thought since its inception. And Malcolm X, personally, is one of my heroes, one of the people who has definitely shaped my worldview in life. Though I believe Malcolm X had some very good points, I believe that his ideas did not get to reach a full conclusion because of his life being cut short. Towards the end of his life, Malcolm X was leaning towards sort of an Islamic universalism, where he believed that Islam, Sunni Islam, traditional Sunni Islam, was the solution to ending white supremacy and injustice around the world. And because his life was cut short, he could not reach further conclusions related to Islamic universalism. And but putting that aside, the idea that the NOI has of creating a separate black community, black separatism within the United States, I believe, once again, is unsustainable. I believe it borders towards totalitarianism, fighting for or advocating for land, fighting for land, I believe, is one of the greatest sins. You know how they say in the Bible, the love of money is the root of all evil? Well, the love for power and land and dominance has been I believe, the true root and cause of all evil, because that is where money comes from, right? All wealth is derived from ownership of property, right? And I will say that the idea that the NOI had was to create maybe a separate black nation in Mississippi or somewhere in the South with a large black majority. Um, while overall it didn't work, because I remember reading in Message to the Black Man by Elijah Muhammad, he was trying to collect 1 penny from every Negro in America, and we would be able to have enough money to buy land and buy a whole community. That never panned out. And the NOI also started many small businesses to raise money and funds to create this separate black nation, but that never panned out as well. And now the NOI is basically an oratory organization. Basically, they just give speeches and oratory on how we should conduct ourselves and that sort of thing. And they've sort of given up on the idea of black separatism, as far as I know, as far as I can tell. I have no disrespect for the NOI. I love the Minister Farrakhan. I have respect for Elijah Muhammad, Fard Muhammad, Malcolm X, and all of the people that came before us who fought for the rights we have now and the right to express ourselves now and furthered our thought on black nationalism. But I will say that the ideas, I believe, are insufficient into solving our problems. I believe as African Americans, black Americans, Negroes, whatever you want to call us, right? Blacks, the indigenous, Hebrews, Israelites, whatever you want to call us, right? We were a part of America from the beginning. We deserve all of the rights of citizenry of America to be treated with respect and dignity and not deal with bias and racism. Therefore, we should not separate, I believe, but also not integrate as well. Keep our black identity, remember our ancestors, remember where we came from, but also try to fight and advocate for a society that is equal and just. Because no matter what, a society that tries to divide itself from the larger group is just bordering on totalitarianism. It'll just become sort of like a North Korea situation. It's insustainable. Separatist movements usually lead towards very hard right wing sorts of messaging, and the circumstances in the 1960s and 50s were very different from what we're facing today in 2022 in the 21st century. But I'll say that we need to continue to advocate for freedom and freedom, justice, and equality within the larger society. That is my opinion right now. So I'll continue. Following the defeat of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 and a trend of rising violence against civil rights workers and supporters, many activists became increasingly skeptical of the power of nonviolent resistance to influence the white dominated power structure in America. Stokely Carmichael's appointment in May 1966 as chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, signaled an organizational shift toward exclusive black self determination and SNCC's approach to civil rights. In June 1966, Carmichael began to use the slogan Black Power to promote racial self respect and increase power for blacks in economic and political realms. He asserted that the concern for black power addresses itself directly to the necessity to reclaim our history and identity from the cultural terrorism and depredation of self justifying white guilt. Carmichael toward black liberation. Rather than publicly criticize black nationalists, King preferred to focus on the social forces and conditions that brought black nationalist philosophies such as black power to the fore. He called their departure from interracial cooperation and civil rights work a response to the feeling that a real solution is hopelessly distant because of inconsistencies, resistance, and faint-heartedness of those in power. King, Ware, page 33. King remained fundamentally opposed to black nationalist rejection of American society as irreparably unjust and to later black nationalists' abandonment of nonviolence. Because of their view that American society is so hopelessly corrupt and enmeshed in evil that there is no possibility of salvation from within, King felt black nationalist movement rejected the one thing that keeps the fire of revolutions burning, the ever-present flame of hope. So I want to talk about black power in the sense of fighting for economic, social, and cultural justice for African Americans, aside from the idea of creating a separate nation, right? I believe this is closer to my ideal or my worldview. We do need to create some sort of economic engine within the African American community that will sustain itself. Instead of spending our money elsewhere with others, we should try to spend it with our community, right, to promote a healthy, sustainable community. They say every $1 in the black community, like 90% of it gets spent outside of the black community. We don't shop at black owned businesses and that sort of thing. I'm not saying we need to only shop at black owned businesses in the sense of it being xenophobic or racist, or racist, that we should discriminate against other businesses, because people should have the right to shop and go wherever they want and can take their hard-earned dollars wherever they want. But I do think it is appropriate in a way to try to help promote our community. If you're living in a community, and in America, most people live around a community, live around people that look like them, of the same race, economic background, and ethnicity, and that sort of thing, you should be trying to help promote things in that community because you want it to get better. You want your community to get better. But I also want to emphasize that as a community, our nation, the United States, is one big community. So we should try to make our entire community just and equitable for everybody, where everybody in this capitalist society is able to rise above and continue to hope that their children can rise above and go further and past them. I'm always, how can I say this? Ambivalent, not ambivalent, but like wary or perplexed as to the abandonment of nonviolence. When they talk about black nationalist movements in the 1960s and 70s, because aside from, a few organizations, and I'm not talking about the Black Panthers, aside from a few organizations or rogue actors, I can't think of a true time in black nationalists or revolutionary movements where there was call for open revolution, when there was a call for open violence against the state, against the United States, or anything like that. I don't remember that ever happening in history. I feel like this is a mischaracterization or a misunderstanding of the rhetoric of groups like the Black Panthers and others like that, as saying, oh, these people were just violent, or they advocated for violence, when I don't remember the Black Panthers, and if anybody prove me wrong, the Black Panthers saying we need open revolution against the United States to create a separate black nation, or for whatever end goal that they had. I don't think that ever happened. In America, there was never a Haiti moment. We never had a Toussaint Louverture who was saying that we need to overthrow the government and power. That's only come from the right. That's only come from the white right, saying that we need to overthrow the government to create a new system. So I do think we need to have hope for a better world. And as it stands right now, I am against nationalism in all contexts. But let's also read this article from the North Carolina State University. It's called Black Nationalism in Historical Context. Staff writers at the Nubian Message were not alone in adopting tenets of black nationalism as they critiqued social and political developments in the 1990s. As Africana Studies scholar Melania Price argues, black nationalist thought is one of the oldest and most enduring ideological constructs developed by African Americans to make sense of their social and political world. Yet black nationalism has manifested itself in different ways in different historical eras. Understanding the development of black nationalism over time helps to situate the Nubians' messages views within a broader historical context. In turn, identifying black nationalist influences on the Nubian message reveals that America was hardly a post-racial society in the 1990s. On the contrary, ongoing racism and political conservatism continue to push African Americans, including the Nubian message staff, to embrace black nationalist ideologies. So even though they don't tell us what the Nubian message was explicitly, by context clues, I'm able to derive that the Nubian message might have been a black newspaper that was advocating for or highlighting stories related to the African American community, and it shifted further and further ideologically to the black nationalist right, or that that it was started to lean more towards black nationalist ideologies and ideals. So, as J. Herman Blake writes, black nationalism emerged in the early 19th century because African Americans felt a disconnect between American ideals, liberty, independence, democracy, and the everyday realities, slavery, racism, oppression, that they faced because of their skin color. Early proponents of black nationalism were often free blacks struggling to make their way in a white dominated society. These individuals argued that the American system of slavery and racial hierarchy would never allow for political equality and justice for African Americans, so the only hope was for African Americans to establish a separate country of their own elsewhere. When the Civil War ended in the United States, black nationalists ended their calls for emigration and looked forward to exercising the new political freedoms they gained in the 14th and 15th constitutional amendments. I want to pause and say here that whenever things get really, really bad in America for African Americans, there's always always the call to go back to Africa, right, or to emigrate to different nations, not even just Africa, but to Europe, Latin America, Asia. The movement of peoples all over the world is natural, especially if in their home countries they don't feel like they're getting a square deal. And as we see right now in 2022, many African Americans are looking at different options to emigrate, not just because of racism, but also because of economic opportunities in better places. I am one of them. I'm filming this video right now in Africa, in Mauritius, as I've said before. And I'm doing this to seek better opportunities abroad, and also because I have many grievances with the United States. So whenever we get better rights, whenever things get better in the United States, that African Americans slow down on the rhetoric of emigrating or leaving. But when things get worse, the movement, the ideas, or the will to emigrate becomes even more. And that's natural with all peoples. All right. But African Americans still face discrimination in education, employment, housing, and other areas after the war, and in the South especially. African Americans were still disenfranchised thanks to poll taxes, literacy tests, and other Jim Crow efforts to exclude them from voting. Some African Americans, including Booker T. Washington, advocated for an economic version of black nationalism as a solution to African Americans' plight. Washington and others argued that white Americans would view African Americans as worthy of equal treatment if African Americans could prove their usefulness in areas such as industry and agriculture. White Americans would also see African Americans differently if the latter raised themselves out of poverty, either through industrial and agricultural education or through black businesses that supported self-sustaining black communities. Both strategies involved racial solidarity and self-help in economic activities. Unlike political nationalism, both strategies also emphasized integration into mainstream American society. I want to say Booker T. Washington is often cited as the father, the granddaddy of respectability politics. Respectability politics is the idea that black Americans and all non note how racist this is. All non-white immigrants to America need to assimilate themselves into the larger dominant society. They need to embrace the larger culture of that society, abandon their roots. And try to be more like them, dress like the dominant society, be educated in the ideas, be educated in the system of the dominant society, and take on the larger robes and context of that larger society, right? Basically be like white people, right? And also at the same time, pursue education, become educated, contribute to the community, don't get in trouble, don't commit crimes, right? That sort of thing, right? I want to say that while everybody should try to be educated, live a happy, healthy life without hurting people. Everybody in any country should always try to do that. Black Americans, whether we have a PhD or a GED, can still be called nigga. We can still be harassed by the police. We can still be discriminated against in housing, in jobs, and that sort of thing. So whether you're wearing a suit or whether you're wearing Timberland boots, you can still get the royal nigga treatment. You can still be discriminated against. So while I do think Booker T. Washington had good advice, his advice is what every citizen should do. Take care of yourself, right? Take care of your family. Get educated, go to university, join the army, stay out of trouble, get a trade, do a job, yes. But for African Americans, what we specifically face is xenophobia and racism at many turns in life. So just telling us to, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, or to, pull your pants up, or to put on a suit and tie, that sort of thing will not stop the discrimination. You can still be profiled. You can still not get your job, not get the job, even though you're more qualified than the white guy who got it. These sorts of things still happen regularly to African Americans. And that's why I think respectability politics is a shame, All right, I'll continue. Although economic nationalism succeeded in strengthening internal bonds within the African American community, it made few inroads into ongoing discrimination against African Americans in the early to mid 20th century. Once again, black nationalists turned to a different strategy, cultural nationalism. The view promoted pride in African American history and culture as a way to develop racial pride and identity. It was also thought that promoting historical accomplishments of Africans and African Americans would show white America that black people had made significant contributions to world history and therefore deserved equal rights in contemporary society. After World War I, writer and activist Marcus Garvey integrated these three themes, political, economic, cultural nationalism, into one ideology that rejected white values and embraced blackness on its own terms. In the mid 20th century, especially, this integrated form of black nationalism often served as a counterpoint to racial integration movements. Black nationalists in the 1960s and 70s included Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, as well as Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, founders of the prominent Black Panther Party. These groups and individuals frequently emphasize black people's right to self determination or their right to decide their own form of government and control their own lives. In the process, they encouraged individuals to hold leaders, black, white, or otherwise, accountable for their decisions. Like their predecessors, black nationalists in the 1960s and 70s also emphasized independence from Anglo American culture and promoted a shift towards or back to African society and culture, a movement known as Pan Africanism. Even after the political decline of the Black Panther Party in the 1980s, black nationalist thought continued to influence African American activists well into the 1990s, thanks to ongoing publications of the party's newspaper, the Black Panther, and other literature. Changing demographics in the U.S. and the political threat that new groups posed sparked a conservative backlash against multiculturalism, affirmative action, and other policies intended to promote diversity. At the same time, events like the 1992 Los Angeles riots sparked anger over racial profiling, white police brutality, and judicial prejudice. Ongoing racism and political conservatism frustrated many African Americans who had hoped that the 1990s would usher in a new era of improved race relations. As Kevin Blue's article in the Nubian Message reveals, the rise of black conservatism, which emphasized individual self improvement, economic development through free enterprise, and integration within mainstream American society as the keys to African American success, particularly angered African Americans who thought that such views betrayed the African American community's interests as a whole. The conservative movement galvanized individuals like Carolyn Holloway of the Nubian Message to call for African Americans to unite in the face of political opposition and collectively voice their concerns and interests. In addition to reviving elements of black political nationalism in the 1990s, individuals disillusioned with the state of race relations in the U.S. also responded by adopting black nationalist views about African American history and culture. The hope was that cultural nationalism could unite African Americans once again in the face of outside racism by providing common bonds of history and heritage. The Nubian Message calls to adopt an alternate spelling of Africa, reject white materialism and definitions of success, and receive strong doses of Afrocentric material can be seen in this light. The persistence of black nationalist thought in the Nubian Message also and other publications is evidence that African Americans in the 1990s continue to feel that though they are in this country, they are not part of this country. American history, too often whitewashed of African American influences, only confirm this feeling for many African Americans. Here are the footnotes right here. So as it pertains to Pan-Africanism and Afrocentrism, I I I appreciate some elements of Pan Africanism, but I believe Pan Africanism and Afrocentrism in as it is right now in 2022 is like an American cultural construct because I don't think these things exist in Africa as a whole. Like when we talk about wearing dashikis or wearing thobes or kufis and all these sorts of things that are a part of like fashion or a part of the outerwear of showing your blackness in America, these things are really culturally specific in Africa, right? Like only certain groups of people, ethnicities, or certain nations have these certain garbs. And in America, we sort of, because we're a mix of different people from West Africa, we have just amalgamated and threw it all together and made a mishmash of different cultural traits from different West African nations. So I believe Pan Africanism and Afrocentrism is really just another expression of African American cultural identity, right? And I take up parts of that, you know. I mean, I display that in how I wear my clothes, but also in how I think. And in the set, and when I say I express this in how I think, I believe that I do have a mindset of wanting to see Africa get better, and also at the same time, I tying myself to Africa and acknowledging my descent as an African descended person, a person descended from West Africa. I'm not denying that, even though I identify as a Black American, and I also want to know more about West Africa, but I also want to know more about the world. I also want to know more about every country, about every nation. This is why I am not scared to go anywhere in the world or be in many different places or spaces, even if I am not welcome, right? The world is ours, right? And they also mentioned, that here in the 1990s, there was a shift towards black conservatism, which we're seeing a rise in right now, with the most prominent figure of black conservatism being Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, and this goes back to Booker T. Washington's idea of pick yourself up by your bootstraps, respectability politics, that sort of thing. This is another facet of black nationalism in the sense that black nationalism is American nationalism, and to prove that you are an American or to be a true American, you should have some self-reliance, self independence, like personal responsibility and those sorts of things, which are things that everybody should have. But under certain contexts, for different people, these things mean different things and are not always acted out in the full way. So these are the two articles about black nationalism. And if you want to know my definitive answer, whether I, Simon Hill, am a black nationalist, my answer is no, 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 hell no. I am not a black nationalist at all. Period. Period. I am not a black nationalist. I am not a nationalist for any country. I don't believe in countries. Countries are not real. I understand that black Americans face a certain uh, set of circumstances that are extremely different than any other group of people in the world, but I don't believe that we need a separate African American nation or state, period. I believe in helping our community, supporting black businesses. I believe in black Americans wanting to emigrate to Africa if they want to. You do not have to. We should be able to live in the country that we built free, that we built for free, without the fear of racism, prejudice, with all the opportunities that every American should have. The right to be able to live where we want, love who we want, work where we want, period. So that's my answer. And if anybody is ever going to accuse me of black nationalism again, please point them to this video. I'll point them to this video. May they be educated on what black nationalism is. I have respect for all of the people that came before me who fought for the freedoms that we have today. And I also have respect for the people that are alive now who are fighting for the freedoms we have today. On my channel, we do not do culture war. We do not do gender war. We do not do diaspora war. We only bang on white supremacy. On my channel, we only bang on white supremacy because we want to end white supremacy, because white supremacy does not know a national border, which is another reason why I'm not a black nationalist, because in every country you can find white supremacy. In Africa, you could find white supremacy. So we need to kill white supremacy to make a world where everybody is able to live freely, justly, and in peace. So my name is Simon Hill. This has been Black Nationalism. Thank you for watching, and peace.